Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Ryan, aka Ryantist the Scientist. I am on a mission to empower and inspire everyone with knowledge and fervor of the natural world. Maybe you have some questions, and that's great. I'm here to answer them for you. So let's do that together here on another episode of Ryantist the Scientist. Hello everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Ryantist the Scientist. Today before we get started, really excited to talk a little bit about my reforestation project. So I have launched an initiative with this show and your support to contribute to reforesting Appalachia as well as other parts of the country and the world that have experienced historic issues with deforestation. So every episode of this show that is published will result in the planting of one tree in Appalachia, and a portion of the proceeds of every episode in perpetuity will continue to support the reforestation of Appalachia. Additionally, with every purchase from my science store on my website, www.ryantist.com, a tree will be planted as well. I'm very excited for us to be able to create a platform and a vessel by which reforesting can occur. So thank you so much for supporting the show in all of the ways that you do. It's really exciting for me to work with you all on creating a way that we can all contribute to improving the air quality, decreasing air pollution, mitigating the effects of climate change, and improving the biodiversity and desertification issues that are going on in the world. We get to work towards fixing that. So today's question comes from MJ, and it is about recycling. So to start, let's hear from MJ.
Hi, Ryantist. It's MJ. So years ago, there was this whole expose that came out about your recycling doesn't actually go to a recycling place. It just goes to New Jersey or something. And it's made me feel like I shouldn't even bother recycling because this goes to be a problem elsewhere and it doesn't actually do anything. What's the deal with that? Should we be recycling? Does anything actually get recycled? This is a common thing that comes up. If you don't rinse out your plastics, they don't get recycled. If you don't, I'm so confused on recycling, and I feel like that is by design because big plastic has us by the balls. I don't know. Please help me. Just tell me what to do. What should I do? Do I recycle? Do I not recycle? Do I burn stuff in my backyard by myself? What do I do? Okay, I love you. Goodbye.
Thank you so much, MJ, for calling in with your question. I feel like this is such a good one because it touches on so many different types of things. So within this question we have some myths, we have some half-truths, we have some propaganda, and we have some real stuff. So all mixed together. So the first thing that I want to point out is that yes, you should absolutely recycle. But when I say that, what we're recycling is super important. The way that I like to think about recycling is like this. There's recycling, your aluminum, your glass, your paper, your cardboard. And then there's plastic, and that's different. So I would like to reframe the narrative around recycling because plastic has ruined the reputation of recycling. Because plastic is hardly ever recyclable, let alone actually recycled. And that's the concerns that you're referencing. However, everything else is actually recyclable, and it is recycled, and it can be recycled in near perpetuity. And the recycling rates for all of those materials are really, really good. So first, let's talk about recycling getting shipped off to other places. That's like out of sight, out of mind, like you said. This in domestically, like within the United States to other parts of the United States, this happens. So it with like waste and recycling. So waste, like municipal solid waste, landfill, in places like New York and cities like it, there's no actual landfill here, and we'll send trash like landfill material out to places like Virginia where it will go to landfills. And with recycling, our recycling gets shipped out to either be processed domestically or processed overseas, and it'll get shipped out. So let's dive into the myth that we're talking about here with the like shipping out things overseas. So what we've been told is that China has put regulations on and has stopped accepting recyclable material from the United States, and that it has to do with it being like too dirty because we were like not rinsing off food at home. That's basically what we've been told. However, what actually is happening is that in addition to a portion of the amount of recycling, plastic recyclables that get sent out of the country to places like China, we also send a bunch of other stuff. This other stuff includes a bunch of different types of industrial wastes and industrial byproducts, as well as a portion of the plastics that we're sending out to be processed for recycling. So China has put more tight regulations on importing of materials like waste materials from foreign entities like the United States. They've banned 24 types of solid waste and have gotten stricter with contamination standards. That is true. However, we've been told that it has to do with us. Like the American people, Americans, the general public, we've been tricked into thinking that it's like because there's still like tuna left inside the can, or like there's still like this little bits of like peanut butter in the under the lip of the like the twisty part of the jar, and that like that's why they're not taking it anymore. And that's not what's happening. So the materials that China has placed bans on and has like regulated, this is what they include. Palladium slag, which is like scrap iron from smelting processes that has other components in it like calcium oxide, calcium fluoride, which makes it really, really poor quality as far as like for using. It's like the byproduct. Then there's waste from textile mills and like unsorted textile waste, like unusable like cottons, things like that, as well as ash and like other residue from manufacturing processes. Most of the materials that we're talking about that are being banned entirely or are being super regulated and like turned away are because of manufacturing processes, things that have like absolutely nothing to do with you and me at home, not getting like every molecule of like food off of the lid of like the yogurt before it goes into the recycling thing. So like the second layer to this like myth situation that's going on is that that plastics are recyclable. That like if you have a piece of plastic and it has that triangle on the back with the arrows, that it's recyclable. And that's also just entirely not true. And so like this is where I think your concerns are about when it comes to recycling, that like it's not recycled. And it's true because it's like it's not, because it can't be. And we've been told that it can be. So that little like triangle with the numbers in it, the only ones that are actually recyclable are the ones that have the number 1 and the number 2 on the bottom. And that's not most of them. Like think of this. the plastic containers that all like literally all food comes in, like berries, the containers that like I see eggs still like in plastic. I see like greens being sold in plastic tubs. All of those are not recyclable. They're not, the quality of the plastic is not a high enough quality polymer and for it to be like melted down and like turned into something different. Same thing with soda bottles. Sadly, soda bottles are most soda bottles are not a high enough quality polymer in order to like meet the minimum criteria for being recycled. So we're putting them into bins and like they are getting accepted as recyclable materials, but the actual process of recycling does not afford them to be able to be recycled at all. So basically, with all this stuff about like sending stuff that's like recyclable, China's refusing. China and other countries are refusing our stuff because it's full of industrial waste and unsorted plastic because we're being lied to and told that yes, you can recycle it, but no, you cannot. So we have all of these things that we think are recyclable being thrown into bins with like plastics that are actually recyclable when most of the things that we're told are not. This is where I'm going to like jump back into or like get into this whole like separating plastics from recycling as like a concept. And the best way to think about this is as two separate things, in my opinion. And, you know, plastic is plastic because ultimately it can't be recycled. It's like a different thing. And manufacturers of plastic have little interest in plastic being recycled and don't really count on that ever being a successful thing because they are not accounting for there being any recycled plastics. They're like amping it up because they know that they're not recyclable. There's no material coming back in to be used to make plastics again. They're upping the amount that they're putting out because they know that it can't be recycled. So like single-use plastics are just not it. Recycling, real recycling, metal, paper, cardboard, glass. This is like entirely different, and we can talk about each one of those specifically, each one of these types of recyclable materials, and get into like the statistics and get like a decent idea of like what's going on with each of them. So we're going to start off with like the big one, the really, really successful one, and that's paper, including cardboard. So in the United States, 100 billion cardboard boxes are used every single year. That's 301 cardboard boxes per human in the United States. One box every single day for the first 10 months of the year is what we use. You know, I said that we use them because paper products have the highest recycling percentage of any of the recyclable materials. At cardboard, 96.5% of cardboard is recycled. 65% of paper is recycled, and 20% of paper packaging is recycled. So interestingly enough, paper products are, with all of these high recycling rates, are also the largest component of waste in municipal solid waste streams. So they are the most recycled item and also are the most frequently observed items in landfills and like the most frequently delivered items to landfills. This to me is like one of the dangers of how we're being misled into thinking that like recycling does not matter, because if the recycling rates of these types of products go down, they're also already the most prevalent form of waste in landfills that it'll get so much more. There'll be so much more of it. And because it's the highest contributor to landfills, the actual amount of that is 17 million tons of cardboard a year. So there's like room for improvement to maximize its success and to decrease the amount of this waste that's getting there, because it shouldn't be getting there. And like, why should we care about paper in landfills? Because like, doesn't paper break down so fast in comparison to all these other things? Yes, it breaks down in a very, very short period of time. However, the way that it breaks down matters. So, paper that's not recycled, that ends up in a landfill, is very different than in like a composting program, in like how it the emissions that it creates. So because of the different type of like respiration that's happening in the breaking down of the material. So if it's not recycled, it can either go to composting or to a landfill. If it goes to a composting facility, it's being turned over a lot frequently and it's mixed in with a bunch of other materials. And in a landfill, that's not what happens. It just gets packed in and it just sits there. And that leads to methanogenesis, the generation of methane. This happens because of anaerobic respiration, because of the lack of oxygen. If it's just like packed in there with like a bunch of other stuff, it produces methane, which is like a super potent greenhouse gas that is, as far as like potency, it's significantly more potent than and consequential than carbon dioxide. So it has the potential to have like a really, really high heating component for like average global temperatures. If the amount of it going to landfills gets amped up, will mean more methane gas being produced because it's there. So in regards to like recycling paper and cardboard, we're basically like killing it. Some of the paper, like paper wrapping, is only like in the 20s, and that can definitely be improved upon. A lot of that stuff is more likely than not soiled with food waste, and that's why composting programs are actually super important and a part of this conversation with recycling, because paper is recyclable, but if it can't go to recycling, the next diversion should be towards composting before it goes in the garbage. So, glass. In the United States, there is 12.8 million tons of glass that is generated annually. Of that 12.8 million, 3 million tons is recycled. So that's like 30-ish percent, 31%. The remaining 7.6 million tons of glass gets sent to landfills every year. And this glass comes in many forms. So like think of glass bottles, things like that, and jars. But also think of like building materials, like when windows break or are replaced, or demolition, stuff like that. And this glass is a part of the unrecycled glass too, all this like construction stuff. So at home, recycling glass can improve the rates of recycling and decrease the amount of glass that's going into the landfills, or escaping the waste stream in transit, or just like in transit to facilities and like breaking and stuff like that, and getting into the water through like sewer systems, et cetera, and like making its way into the ocean as it's escaped the waste stream. So like, and this is bad because glass takes thousands of years to break down. It's also bad because glass is a non-renewable resource, and I feel like it's been a topic of conversation many, many times that the amount of glass is starting to look not so great. The amount of available materials to produce glass is looking not so great. So the recycling of it matters a ton in that there's only so much that can be made from like the silicate and sand to produce glass for all of these things, which is like an infinitely recyclable material that just kind of like ends up in the garbage a lot, 70% of the time. And it's not super uncommon for it to end up in the oceans, and like this is like a really interesting thing that I have observed, and I've always been like, that's weird. And that's like humans' relationship with glass making its way into the oceans and how we've responded to that versus the plastic thing. Like sea glass is like a thing that people like look for on the beach, and it's like, wow, it's so cool and it's so pretty, and they like sell it, like you spend money on it, and it's like literally garbage. Like you're buying pollution. Like it's pollution. It's not even just garbage, it's pollution that's like gotten into beaches, gotten into waterways, and like people like buy it. It's just like a weird thing to me where like if that was anything else, like if that was plastic, which it is, also a thing, but if you went and picked up plastic on the beach, it's like we have like a very different relationship with those two things. And it's just like an interesting observation. Both of them are pollution. Both of them are really, really bad. But like humans think that sea glass is like cool and we like kind of love it, and that's insane to me. But I digress. Ultimately, glass is one of the really, really good examples of why recycling bins in public places are tremendously important. Because like, for example, in a park in New York, especially, there's like a lot of accessibility and like systemic racism and like inequality stuff involved in this. Is that like if I go to a park in New York, or if I walk down my street in New York, depending on what neighborhood I'm in, I have the ability to recycle my glass bottle that I bought from the store. And like that is one of the big reasons that glass recycling rates are not higher, because there's a barrier to who can do it. And, there's a lot of materials that are in like regular circulations in all of these places, like glass drinking bottles, that just can be counted on entering a landfill because the opportunity to recycle it doesn't exist in some places and does in others. So like glass recycling in public spaces is super important because it's a finite resource. It pollutes and damages like the environment just like plastic in a different way, but lasts just as long. And it's not good. Aluminum is another really, really great, is another example of a material with a really, really good recycling rate. There's 3.9 million tons of aluminum is generated every single year in the United States, and that's in the form of your cans of soup, vegetables, but also like the aluminum that's found in furniture and stuff like that. The recycling rate of all aluminum products as like a whole is 35%, just 34.9, just shy of 35%. But looking at just cans of like drinking cans, like soda, beer, that category of aluminum, the recycling rate is 50%. So of the 3.9 million tons of aluminum that's generated, half of that goes to, well, not half, the 39%, 34, 50%. So of the 3.9 million tons of aluminum that's generated, about like 2.5% of, not 2.5%, 2.5 million tons goes into landfills every year of the 3.9 million tons that's generated. Again, I defer to recycling being an issue in public spaces in cities because of the opportunity to recycle doesn't exist. And that is one of the reasons that our recycling rates for these materials are not good. So the other reasons are because of like this like misinformation that you like have referenced. To recap, so like ultimately, recycling, actual recycling of actually recyclable materials is tremendously important. It reduces the amount of methane gas that gets emitted into the atmosphere that contributes to climate change. It reduces the amount of materials that need to be transported to landfills, and it reduces the amount of materials that fill landfills. It reduces the amount of pollution when these things escape the waste stream in all of the ways that they do. And by like ensuring that we do recycle, like particularly at home, like, you know, being at home versus like walking around, there's like, you know, that way of thinking about it too. There's like these in public waste streams, like walking down the street or being in a park and not having access to recycling. And then there's at home, like, if you have the ability to recycle, like there is a recycling program, making sure that you do it, like it does actually matter because of all of those things. It matters like a lot. And it also makes it so that we don't have to extract more resources than is necessary. So like aluminum and glass, these things are like infinitely recyclable. Paper is like is also recyclable in really it takes a long time for it to get degraded to a point of it not being able to be recycled anymore, which is when it can be composted. All of these things, the more we recycle, the less resources have to get extracted for like their overall production for the like demand of use. So it also decreases the burden on the planet to produce these materials for things. So like the real issue is that is plastics, and like that they generally just like shouldn't be made anymore. Like there's plenty of evidence showing us that plastic is not good. There's no real benefit for plastic outside of like really isolated incidences, and those are usually medical incidences. But there's like no need for the excessive amount of single-use things that are made of plastic, because these materials we've been like lied to about, and that they are recyclable, and we know now for a fact that they're not, and they can't be recycled. And you know, like I refer to the old like adage of from when I was growing up of reduce, reuse, recycle, and to apply it to specifically plastic. You know, reduce the amount of plastics that are being consumed by replacing them with other reusable materials. Jonathan Van Ness has it's like a glimmering example of this, with like hair care products that normally come in plastic containers that just can't be recycled, go in the garbage. Uses aluminum, which is an infinitely recyclable material. And that's like a good example of, you know, reducing the amount of single-use plastics that are being consumed by transitioning to using a single-use item that can be recycled and also can be recycled for forever. Recycle all the other important single-use items that we have in society, such as the cans, the cardboard, the papers, the glass, and also look into composting, because that will help with the paper. So I hope that this answers your question about recycling and kind of like unearths a little bit of the lies and like propaganda that we've been like fed by the oil industries, because plastic is oil. That's who's behind all of it, or its generation and manufacturing and PR for how, quote, required it is for our society. It's bad. And so, like, to summarize everything, I would say the best way to think about it is there's recycling and then there's plastic. And that plastic is all of the issues that we've been told about are plastic and not recycling. Recycling is actually a tremendously successful program. It's not perfect. It needs help and it needs to be participated in more. But in accessibility, that like everyone should be able to have access to recycling so that the amount that we recycle goes up. Because like the burden of recycling all of these materials is not just you in your house, but it's everybody. Like we do need stuff. We need cans. We need paper. We need these things in like the mechanisms of our society. And they are recyclable. Us not making it so that we can all recycle them is like our fault. Like that's on us, and that can be fixed. So like absolutely recycle and know that plastics are different. They're a problem. They basically can't be recycled almost ever. So they should be avoided as much as humanly possible, as often as you can, defer to a different material for something, but don't go crazy, because it's ultimately like the onus isn't on specifically you to stop plastic from getting into the oceans and from getting into the environment and from, being present in the biology of like all living things. It's not like just on you. That's like a bigger thing. But at home, when we have the ability to recycle, we should, because yes, it absolutely matters. And improving each one of these categories will benefit the world in a different way. I hope this was helpful in understanding this kind of confusing topic a little bit better. If anybody else has any questions about this, please leave comments, send me messages on Instagram, et cetera, and maybe we can actually like get into this a little bit more specifically by, category and explore everything a little bit more in depth separately. That could be fun to do too. Remember that you can support the show in a variety of ways. Thank you so much for supporting it by participating and calling in and for listening. You can also support the show on Patreon, and you can visit my science store on my website at Ryantist.com. Every item that is purchased will plant a tree. Follow the show is a great way to support it. You can leave reviews, which is another amazing way to support it. The more interactions that I get, the algorithm gods are pleased, and the reach can be spread, and more reforestation can happen because of that, which is really, really exciting. And as always, thank you for listening, and until next time, goodbye. If you have questions that you would like to ask, call into the show. That phone number is 347-470-4144. Again, 347-470-4144. And remember, there are no questions that are too big or too small. Music for the show was created by Julian Giamma. I want to say thank you so much for working with me to create such a fun song, and thank you everyone for listening and for supporting the show. See you all again next week.